I never imagined the person I trusted most could become the source of my deepest pain. My name is Aria, and for as long as I can remember, my sister Lila and I were inseparable. Growing up in a quiet suburban town, we shared everything: secrets, dreams, even the smallest joys. Lila was the wild spirit, always chasing the next big adventure, while I found comfort in routine and creation, working as a graphic designer for a small agency in town. Our lives, though different in pace, always felt intertwined like the threads in the art I crafted every day. The house we grew up in still stood on Maple Street, its white picket fence weathered but steadfast. It was where Lila and I spent countless afternoons plotting futures that seemed as bright as the sun setting over the neighborhood pond. Our parents had passed down an inheritance meant to support our futures, a nest egg tucked away in trust, something I had always seen as a quiet safety net, a promise of stability amidst life's unpredictability. I never doubted that Lila felt the same. That illusion shattered one ordinary Tuesday morning. I was sipping my black coffee, scrolling through emails at my cramped desk, when a message from my mother popped up. It was short, almost too casual. Lila used the inheritance funds for her wedding plans. Hope you understand. My heart skipped. I reread the words, disbelief washing over me. I replied immediately, demanding details, but the reply was vague. It's all for Lila's dream wedding. We thought you'd be happy for her. Happy? How could I be happy when everything I had quietly saved for had been siphoned away without a word? My hands trembled as I called Lila. Her voice came through light and carefree, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Hey Aria, isn't it exciting? The venue's booked, the dress is ordered. Mom and Dad said it's all covered now. She laughed, a sound that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. You'll love it when you see it. It's going to be the wedding of the century. I swallowed hard, struggling to keep my voice steady. Lila, the inheritance, it was for both of us. I never agreed to this. She sighed, impatience creeping into her tone. Aria, it's for the whole family. You always worry too much. Besides, it's just money. You'll find another way. That moment broke something inside me. The sister who once shared dreams with me now dismissed my feelings as trivial, as if my trust was a commodity she could spend freely. I wanted to scream, to explain how this wasn't just about money, but about respect, about the future I had envisioned for myself. But instead I hung up, feeling hollow and betrayed. The next days were a blur of attempted conversations and cold shoulders. I reached out to my parents hoping for support, maybe even an apology. Instead, I was met with defensive explanations and a chorus of Lila's our daughter too. And you're being selfish. The family I had counted on to stand with me had chosen sides, and I was left standing alone. At work, my creative spark dimmed. The colors I once drew with vibrancy now seemed muted, reflecting the numbness inside. I found myself staring at my computer screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat I couldn't catch. How had the people I loved most turned their backs so easily? One afternoon, I walked past the small community park where Lila and I used to play as kids. The bench where we carved our initials was worn but still there. I sat down, the cool wood grounding me. I thought about the countless times we promised to protect each other, to never let anything come between us. Yet here I was, grappling with a truth I never wanted to face. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the familiar playground, a flicker of resolve sparked within me. This wasn't just a family dispute. It was my future at stake. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was my independence, my chance to build a life on my own terms. And if my family couldn't see that, then maybe I had to fight for it myself. That night, I began gathering every document I could find, bank statements, trust papers, any record related to the inheritance. I scanned emails, texts, anything that might explain how this had happened. Quietly, methodically, I started piecing together a picture that was as painful as it was necessary. The next morning, I met Lila at our favorite coffee shop, hoping for a chance to reach her before things spiraled further out of control. She arrived late, flushed with excitement, clutching a glossy bridal magazine. When she saw me, her smile faltered. Aria, can't this wait? I'm stressed enough with all the wedding stuff. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Lila, I know you're excited, but you need to understand how serious this is for me. The inheritance was supposed to help us both. Taking it without telling me, it's not just a mistake. It's a betrayal. Her eyes narrowed, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. It's just money. I'm making a dream come true, and you're standing in the way." I shook my head, feeling the sting of tears I refused to shed. "It's not about the money. It's about trust. About respect. You didn't just take what was mine. You took away my future." Lila's expression hardened. "Maybe you're just jealous. Maybe you don't want me to be happy." The accusation struck me like a punch. Jealousy? No, this was about fairness, about protecting what was rightfully mine. But as I looked at her so caught up in her own world, I realized this was bigger than just the two of us. Walking away from the coffee shop, I felt a mix of sorrow and determination. The family I had always believed would stand by me was fractured, and I was going to have to find my own way to heal the wounds and reclaim what I had lost. I wasn't sure how yet, but I knew the journey was just beginning. I thought confronting Lila would bring some clarity, maybe even a sliver of understanding between us. Instead, it opened a floodgate of denial and dismissal that left me feeling more isolated than ever. After our tense meeting at the coffee shop, I braced myself for what was coming next. A confrontation not just with Lila, but with the entire family. I called Lila again the next day, determined to get through to her. "Lila, we need to talk, really talk. This isn't just about the wedding or money. It's about us, about trust. I want us to find a way through this." Her voice was sharp, almost cold. "Aria, I don't have time for this drama. Everything's set for the wedding. Mom and Dad agreed, so maybe you should just get over it." Hearing my parents' names invoked like some final authority crushed me. I needed to speak to them directly to make them see how deeply hurt I was. The next evening, I gathered my courage and called Mom. The line rang a few times before she picked up. "Aria, darling. How are you?" Her tone was warm, but I could sense an undercurrent of unease. I dove right in. "Mom, I need to understand why you and Dad decided to let Lila use the inheritance without telling me. It was meant to support both of us, and now I'm left with nothing." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Sweetheart, Lila's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. We thought you'd be happy for her. We didn't mean to exclude you." "Happy?" I echoed, my voice trembling. "You took away my future without asking. I trusted you." Mom's tone hardened slightly. "Aria, you're being selfish. This is family. We have to support each other. Lila needed this, and you'll understand that one day." I felt a wave of disbelief crash over me. My pleas for fairness were dismissed as selfishness, as if my feelings were less valid because I wasn't the one getting married. I hung up, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and sadness. The next morning, I confronted Dad during a rare visit home. He was in the garden, pruning the roses, the same way he'd done every summer since I was a child. "Dad, why did you let this happen? Why didn't you talk to me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Aria, we did what we thought was best. Lila's wedding was important to all of us. You've always been the responsible one. We thought you'd understand." "Understand that you stole from me?" I shot back, feeling tears sting my eyes. "I'm not just some backup plan, Dad. I have dreams too." He sighed heavily, the weight of the conversation settling between us. "It's complicated, Aria. We didn't want to hurt you." "But you did," I whispered, stepping back into the house. The walls seemed to close in on me, suffocating in their silence. That day, I called my closest friends, searching for someone who could offer perspective. Their responses were sympathetic but also cautious. "Family is complicated," one said. "Maybe you need to let it go for now." But I couldn't let it go. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the wedding invitations, the lavish plans, and felt the sting of exclusion. My family's unwillingness to hear me only deepened the wound. At work, my distraction grew. I missed deadlines and found it hard to focus on the projects that once fueled my passion. My boss noticed and called me in for a chat. "Aria, is everything okay? You've been off your game lately." I forced a smile. "Just some family stuff. I'll be fine." But I wasn't fine. The betrayal from those I loved most had shaken my foundation. I felt like a ghost in my own life, drifting through days without purpose. One evening, I sat in my small apartment, the silence pressing down on me. My phone buzzed, a group message from my family chat. I hesitated before opening it, bracing for the inevitable storm. The messages were filled with accusations against me. Lila called me cold and ungrateful, while my parents insisted I was being selfish and unreasonable. The words hit harder than any blow. It was as if I had become the villain in my own story. I typed a response trying to explain my feelings, but it was met with silence. No replies, no attempts to understand. Just a wall of stone-cold indifference. That night, sleep eluded me. I replayed every conversation, every glance, every word. How had the people who once promised to protect me become the ones tearing me down? The lines between love and betrayal blurred until I wasn't sure what was real anymore. In the days that followed, the family gatherings I once looked forward to became unbearable. My presence was met with cold shoulders and whispered conversations. At a Sunday dinner, I overheard Lila telling a cousin, "Aria just wants attention. She's making a mountain out of a molehill." I felt invisible, erased from the family narrative I had helped build. The sister I had loved and trusted was now a stranger, her smile a mask hiding disdain. One afternoon, overwhelmed, I drove to the old park where we used to play. Sitting on the bench where we carved our initials, I allowed myself to cry. Not just for the stolen inheritance, but for the loss of the sister I once knew, for the family that no longer felt like home. But even in that moment of sorrow, a small voice inside me refused to be silenced. I realized this betrayal was more than just financial. It was a test of my strength, a challenge to reclaim my voice and stand firm in my truth. I began documenting every interaction, every dismissive comment, every moment I was pushed aside. I sent emails asking for explanations, recorded phone calls where possible, determined to protect myself from further erosion. Lila's wedding date loomed closer, and with it, the pressure to stay silent and let the family drama fade. But I knew if I stayed quiet, I'd lose more than money, I'd lose myself. One evening, after another heated exchange with my parents where they accused me of tearing the family apart, I finally voiced what I had been holding back. "I'm not your enemy," I said, voice steady despite the tears. "I'm your daughter, your sister. But I won't stand by and watch you erase me." The room fell silent. For a moment, I thought maybe something would change. But then Lila scoffed. "You're the one who chose to be the outsider, Aria. Maybe this family is better off without your bitterness." Their rejection stung, but it also hardened my resolve. If my family wouldn't support me, I would have to stand alone. I realized that sometimes those closest to us can become the greatest obstacles, and the path forward means confronting not just them, but the pain they cause. That night, as I lay awake, I made a choice. I would no longer be a silent victim. I would fight to reclaim my inheritance, my dignity, and my future, no matter the cost. I always thought I was the one left vulnerable, but as I started digging deeper, I realized I had underestimated just how tangled the web really was. After the fallout with my family, I knew I couldn't rely on their goodwill to make things right. I needed proof, concrete evidence that showed the truth, not just my word against theirs. So I began to quietly gather every scrap of information I could find, determined to expose what had really happened to the inheritance. It started innocently enough, with me scanning through old emails, bank statements, and messages. But as I sifted through the digital trail, a pattern began to emerge, one that pointed to months of financial maneuvering, not just a sudden decision to use the inheritance for Lila's wedding. There were transfers, withdrawals, and payments made under vague descriptions, all funneling money into accounts tied to the wedding planners, venues, and designers. The scale of it was staggering. I remember one night, sitting at my kitchen table, piles of printed documents spread out before me, the glow of my laptop illuminating the exhaustion on my face. My hands trembled as I connected the dots. Lila had been siphoning funds little by little over several months, carefully hiding the trail from me. It wasn't just a reckless act born of excitement. It was calculated, deliberate. The betrayal cut even deeper when I realized my parents weren't just passive bystanders. Their signatures appeared on authorization forms I hadn't been informed about, approving transactions that drained the inheritance. I had always believed they would protect both their daughters equally, but it seemed they had chosen sides long before I even knew there was a fight. I took a deep breath and reached out to a close friend, Samir, who was a lawyer. He was someone I trusted implicitly, someone who could help me navigate the legal maze I was about to enter. Over coffee one afternoon, I laid out the evidence I had uncovered, my voice barely steady as I explained the months of hidden financial abuse. Samir listened intently, his brow furrowed as he flipped through the documents. Aria, this is serious. What you've got here isn't just a family dispute. It's potential fraud. He looked up, his eyes sharp. If we act strategically, you might be able to freeze those accounts and stop any further misuse. Hearing his words felt like a lifeline. Finally, I had a path forward, a way to reclaim what was rightfully mine. We discussed the next steps: drafting legal notices, filing for injunctions, and preparing to confront my family with undeniable proof. It was daunting, but I knew sitting back meant losing everything. That evening, I drafted an email to Lila and my parents, carefully worded but firm. I demanded transparency and accountability, warning them that I had evidence of financial misconduct and that I was prepared to take legal action if necessary. Sending it felt like stepping off a cliff, but I knew it was a necessary risk. The silence that followed was deafening. For days, no one responded. I could almost hear the storm brewing behind closed doors, the tension simmering beneath the surface. Then, finally, a reply from Lila arrived, defensive and dismissive. "You're overreacting, Aria. This was a family decision. You're just trying to ruin my wedding." Her words stung, but I refused to back down. I forwarded the email chain to Samir, who advised me to proceed with filing for a freeze on any wedding-related accounts. The legal paperwork was complex, but with his help, I managed to submit everything within a week. Almost immediately, the impact was felt. Wedding vendors began reaching out to Lila's planner, confused about payments being halted. The dream wedding she had so eagerly planned was suddenly in jeopardy, and the family's facade of harmony cracked under the pressure. In the midst of this chaos, I received a call from my mother, her voice trembling. "Aria, please, can we talk? This is tearing the family apart." I hesitated but agreed. When we met, her eyes were red-rimmed, and for the first time I saw a flicker of remorse. "I didn't realize how much this would hurt you," she confessed. "We thought we were doing what was best, but maybe we were wrong." I nodded, the years of pent-up anger and hurt surfacing. "It's not just about the money, Mom. It's about trust. About respect. You and Dad made decisions without me, decisions that affected my future." She sighed, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Aria. I want to make this right. But I wasn't sure apology was enough. I needed concrete change, assurances that my rights would be honored, that my future was secure." I told her I was willing to listen, but only if the family could come together to address the damage honestly. Meanwhile, Lila's reaction grew more volatile. Social media became a battleground as she posted rants painting me as the villain, accusing me of trying to sabotage her happiness. Friends and relatives took sides, and the family was splintered in public view. I was shocked by how quickly loyalty shifted and how easily my intentions were twisted. Through it all, I kept my focus on the facts, sharing the evidence I had gathered with Samir, and preparing for any legal battles ahead. I refused to be baited into emotional confrontations. My goal was clear: to protect what was mine and to hold those responsible accountable. One night, as I sat reviewing the documents again, I realized the web of deceit was even more extensive than I thought. There were hidden accounts, shadow transactions, and forged authorizations. Lila and my parents had been working together to conceal the truth, and it was my persistence that had brought it all to light. Feeling a mix of exhaustion and determination, I drafted a detailed report outlining all the findings. With Samir's help, I submitted it to the authorities, initiating an investigation into the financial misconduct. This step felt monumental, a public declaration that the betrayal I suffered was real and unacceptable. The days that followed were tense. My family's denial turned to anger, and I received messages ranging from pleas to threats. But beneath the chaos, I sensed a shift. The truth was no longer just mine to carry. It was out there, forcing everyone to confront the reality they had tried so desperately to hide. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the journey so far. I had gone from feeling powerless to becoming an advocate for myself, unafraid to stand against those who had wronged me. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope that justice might prevail, and that I could reclaim not just my inheritance but my sense of self. And through it all, I learned a hard truth. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us can be the ones who hurt us the most. But with courage and clarity, it's possible to break free from the shadows they cast and find your own light. After weeks of gathering evidence and consulting with Samir, I finally felt ready to take the next step. The weight of the betrayal still pressed heavily on my chest, but I knew that waiting passively was no longer an option. I needed to act decisively, not just for myself, but to send a clear message that this kind of deception couldn't be swept under the rug. Samir and I met at his office on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The sound of raindrops tapping against the windows matched the nervous flutter in my stomach. He laid out the plan with precision, outlining the legal steps we'd take to freeze the funds tied to Lila's wedding and halt any further spending. The thought of stopping the extravagant event in its tracks stirred a strange mix of apprehension and resolve within me. "I'm going to file a petition for an injunction," Samir explained, his tone steady and professional. "This will legally prevent any transactions from those accounts until the court reviews your claim. It's an aggressive move, but necessary given the circumstances." I nodded, absorbing every word. "Will this escalate the conflict with my family?" "Almost certainly," he admitted. "But it's important to protect your interests first. Once the injunction is in place, we can negotiate or proceed further depending on how they respond." The very next morning, Samir filed the paperwork. I received confirmation hours later. The court had accepted the petition and granted a temporary freeze on all accounts associated with the wedding expenses. It felt like a small victory, a shield that would stop the bleeding for now. But as soon as the news spread, the fallout began. I received a barrage of messages and calls, some angry, others pleading. Lila was furious, her texts laced with accusations and threats. "You're ruining everything," she wrote. "This isn't just about money. You're trying to destroy my happiness." My parents tried to reach me too, their voices strained with desperation during phone calls that ended in frustration. "Aria, please reconsider. This is tearing the family apart," Mom begged. I wanted to scream that it was already torn apart, that their choices had fractured us long before any legal action. But I kept my voice calm, explaining that I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was fighting to reclaim what was rightfully mine. At work, the tension seeped into my days. Colleagues whispered, and I caught sidelong glances, as if the family drama had become a spectacle. Yet amidst the turmoil, I found a strange steadiness. For the first time in weeks, I was no longer a passive victim but an active participant in my own story. One afternoon, I confronted Lila directly. We met at a neutral cafe, the air between us thick with unsaid words. She arrived looking tired but defiant, eyes flashing with resentment. "Why are you doing this, Aria? It was supposed to be our family's joy," she said, voice shaking. "It's not joy when it's built on lies and stolen trust," I replied, my own voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I gave you every chance to be honest. This legal action isn't about revenge. It's about fairness." She shook her head bitterly. "To you, fairness means taking away my dreams." I looked at her, the sister I once adored now a stranger. Dreams don't come at the cost of someone else's future. The conversation ended without resolution, but it clarified something essential. Our paths were diverging, and I had to be strong enough to walk mine alone if necessary. The injunction disrupted Lila's wedding plans significantly. Vendors called to ask why payments had stopped. Deposits were frozen and arrangements stalled. The lavish celebration she had envisioned suddenly seemed like a fragile dream slipping through her fingers. Within the family, the tension reached a breaking point. Relatives took sides, whispers of scandal circulated at gatherings, and invitations to family events dwindled. I found myself navigating a minefield of emotions, guilt for the damage caused, but also a fierce determination to stand my ground. One evening, I received a message from my father. It was longer than usual, filled with hesitant apologies and an invitation to meet. I agreed, knowing this was an opportunity to try and mend some of the broken bonds. We met in the park where Lila and I had once played as children. The memories made the silence between us heavy. "Aria," he began, voice rough with emotion, "I'm sorry for how things have unfolded. We made mistakes, and I wish we had handled this differently." I met his gaze, feeling the years of hurt and disappointment simmer beneath the surface. "I want to believe that, Dad. But I need to see that you understand why I had to fight." He nodded slowly. "I do. And I want to find a way forward, for all of us." That conversation planted a seed of hope, fragile but real. I realized that while the legal battle was necessary, the emotional healing would be just as important, if not more so. Back at home, I began to prepare for the next phase. Samir advised me to gather more documentation and continue building a case that would protect my rights long-term. The legal process was daunting, filled with paperwork and deadlines, but I embraced it as a way to reclaim control. Each day brought new challenges, angry phone calls from family, whispered judgments from friends, and the ever-present weight of uncertainty. But I found strength in the small victories. A successful court hearing, a supportive message from a friend, a quiet moment of clarity. I realized that standing up to family betrayal wasn't just about money or legal rights. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my future. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I was no longer afraid to walk it. In the quiet hours of the night, I often reflected on how much had changed. The sister I once knew, the family I once trusted, were now shadows in my past. But standing firm in my truth gave me a newfound sense of freedom. A promise that no matter what happened next, I would never again let anyone take what was mine without a fight. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface finally erupted, and the fallout was more brutal than I ever imagined. Once the injunction froze the wedding funds, everything began to unravel, not just for Lila's plans, but for the fragile family ties we all still clung to. The atmosphere at home was thick with silence and resentment, and on social media, the storm brewed with a fury that left me exhausted and exposed. It all started with a message that went viral within our circle. A public post from Lila, filled with hurt and anger, accusing me of sabotaging her dreams. Her words were sharp, dripping with betrayal, painting me as the villain in a story I never asked to be part of. "My sister has chosen money over family," she wrote. "She's destroying everything with her selfishness." Within hours, the post was shared, liked, and commented on by friends, relatives, and even acquaintances. I found myself at the center of a swirling storm of judgment and isolation. Friends I thought I could trust sent tentative messages, some urging me to reconsider, others awkwardly avoiding the topic altogether. The narrative was spinning out of control, and I was powerless to stop it. The family, once a source of comfort, fractured further. At gatherings, icy glances replaced warm hellos. My parents, caught between their daughters, seemed to slip into silence or offer hollow words of support that barely masked their alignment with Lila. It felt like I was fighting a war on multiple fronts, not just for my inheritance, but for my very identity within the family. One particularly painful Sunday lunch crystallized the depth of the divide. The table was set with the trappings of normalcy, roses in a vase, the familiar aroma of roasted chicken, but the atmosphere was anything but. Conversations were clipped, smiles forced. When I tried to speak about the ongoing legal process, my mother interrupted with a sharp tone. "Aria, enough. You're tearing this family apart. Maybe it's time you thought about what you're really doing." The words hit harder than I expected. I looked around the table, faces I loved, now strangers. My father avoided my gaze, and Lila smirked as if my pain was a joke. I clenched my fists beneath the table, forcing myself to breathe. "I'm fighting for what's right," I said quietly. "Not just for money, but for honesty and respect." They dismissed me, labeling my insistence as bitterness and selfishness. It was a crushing moment, one that laid bare how deeply the wounds ran and how little empathy remained. Outside family walls, the social media battles raged on. I watched helplessly as Lila's followers echoed her accusations, and even some of my friends distanced themselves. I began receiving messages filled with venom. Anonymous threats, cruel jokes, and unsolicited advice to just let it go. The digital world became a hostile place, amplifying the pain and making it impossible to escape. But amidst the chaos, I found unexpected allies. A few close friends stood by me unwaveringly, offering support and reminding me why I had to keep fighting. One evening, after a particularly vicious online exchange, my best friend Kinley messaged me, "You're not alone, Aria. We see the truth, even if the world doesn't." Her words became a lifeline, moments of warmth in an otherwise cold and isolating time. At work, the strain began to show. I struggled to meet deadlines, my focus fractured by the emotional turmoil. My boss pulled me aside one afternoon. "Aria, I know you're going through a lot. Take some time if you need it." But I couldn't afford to step back, not yet. My fight was far from over. The legal proceedings continued, each hearing a battlefield where my family's denial met my determination. Lila's lawyers painted me as the antagonist, accusing me of greed and trying to ruin a joyful occasion. Yet, armed with evidence and guided by Samir's steady hand, I stood firm. One particularly tense hearing left me drained but resolute. As the judge reviewed the documents I'd painstakingly compiled, I saw Lila's face flush with frustration. My heart pounded not with fear, but with a fierce sense of justice. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my voice in a story that had tried to silence me. Outside the courtroom, I overheard whispers, some sympathetic, others skeptical. But I was learning to tune out the noise and focus on what mattered: the truth. Family gatherings became rarer, and when they happened, the atmosphere was brittle. I found myself retreating into silence, avoiding confrontations that only deepened the wounds. Yet, every time I felt the urge to give up, I reminded myself why I started this fight: to protect my future and to stand up against the betrayal that threatened to consume me. One night, I received a message from my father. His tone was softer than I'd heard in months. "Aria, this family is hurting. I hope we can find a way back someday." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that beneath the anger and pain, there was still a chance for healing. But I also knew that healing couldn't come without truth and accountability. The days stretched on, each filled with a mixture of hope and heartbreak. I learned that standing up for myself meant enduring not just legal battles, but emotional ones too. It meant facing public scrutiny and private rejection. It meant walking a lonely path that was both terrifying and empowering. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the sister I once knew, the girl who dreamed alongside me beneath the stars, who promised we'd always protect each other. That sister felt like a distant memory now, replaced by someone I barely recognized. But I held on to the hope that somewhere beneath the hurt, the bond we shared could be mended, or at least understood. For now, though, the fight continued. I refused to let the chaos and accusations silence me or steal my future. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the truth and the unwavering belief that justice was worth every battle. The day of Lila's wedding arrived with a tension that hung heavy in the air, a silent storm threatening to burst at any moment. What should have been a celebration of love and new beginnings had transformed into a public reckoning, one where family secrets and betrayals would no longer remain hidden behind closed doors. When I received the list of guests, my heart skipped. Among the familiar names were friends and relatives who had been quietly informed of the dispute, people who knew the truth behind the fractured family dynamics. It was clear this wedding would be far from the private, joyous event Lila had envisioned. Instead, it promised to be a stage where the tangled threads of our story would unravel for all to see. I debated whether to attend. Part of me longed to confront the situation head-on, to face Lila and our family in the place where everything had come undone. Another part of me feared the spectacle, the humiliation, the raw emotions that could erupt. But ultimately, I knew I couldn't walk away from the moment that had defined so much of my recent life. When I arrived at the venue, the grandeur of the setting felt jarring against the undercurrent of tension. Elegant floral arrangements and twinkling lights masked the fractures beneath the surface. I walked in quietly, taking my seat among guests who greeted me with a mixture of sympathy, curiosity, and unease. As the ceremony began, I felt eyes on me, some filled with support, others clouded by judgment. Then during the vows, I saw her. Lila, radiant but strained, her smile faltering as if she carried the weight of the unresolved conflict on her shoulders. When the moment came for the speeches, the atmosphere shifted. A close family friend, someone who had been privy to the dispute, took the microphone. With a steady voice, she addressed the crowd, weaving a narrative that acknowledged the pain and division beneath the celebration. "We all know that sometimes family stories aren't perfect," she said gently. "But today is a reminder that honesty and forgiveness are the foundation of any lasting bond." Her words felt like an invitation, a call to face the truths we'd been avoiding. Then, unexpectedly, I was asked to speak. The room quieted, all eyes turning to me. My heart pounded, but I stepped forward, determined to use this moment not to attack, but to illuminate. "Thank you for giving me this chance," I began, my voice clear despite the knots in my stomach. "Lila and I have shared a lifetime of memories, dreams, and love. But recently, those bonds have been tested by choices that have hurt me deeply. I paused, scanning the faces before me. Some familiar, some strangers, all witnesses to this fragile moment. The inheritance that was meant to support both of us was used without my knowledge. This isn't just about money. It's about trust, respect, and honesty. I believe that acknowledging our mistakes is the first step toward healing. The room remained silent, the weight of my words settling over everyone. I looked toward Lila, who met my gaze for the first time that evening. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, regret perhaps, or understanding. "I'm not here to ruin this day," I continued. "I'm here to ask for a chance to rebuild what's been broken, to find a way back to each other that's rooted in truth." The silence stretched. Then a few guests nodded, some wiping away tears. The friend who had introduced me smiled softly, a gesture of solidarity. After the speech, the mood shifted subtly. Conversations resumed with a new tone. Less about blame, more about reflection. Lila approached me quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Aria, I'm sorry," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting you." I reached out, taking her hand. "It's not too late to make things right." The ceremony continued, but for me, that moment was the true beginning. A confrontation that forced my family to face the reality we'd been avoiding. The facade of harmony shattered, replaced by a fragile honesty that, while painful, held the promise of healing. Later, as guests mingled, I saw the faces of relatives and friends who had long suspected the truth but never had the courage to speak up. Their presence was a reminder that family dynamics are rarely perfect, but openness can pave the way forward. That night, as I left the venue, the weight of months of conflict felt lighter. The confrontation had been difficult, exposing wounds too raw to hide. But it had also broken the silence, allowing space for truth to breathe. I knew the journey ahead would still be challenging. Forgiveness wouldn't come overnight, and rebuilding trust would take time. But in that moment, standing beneath the stars with the echoes of the day behind me, I felt a cautious hope, the belief that even the deepest fractures could begin to mend if met with courage and honesty. The days following the wedding were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. The confrontation had cracked open the carefully constructed facade my family had maintained for years, and there was no turning back from the truth now. The evidence I had gathered, combined with the public exposure of the dispute, compelled my family to face the reality they'd long ignored. Shortly after the ceremony, the authorities reached out, initiating an investigation into the financial irregularities surrounding the inheritance. The sudden legal scrutiny sent shockwaves through my family. I remember sitting in my apartment, the phone ringing with calls from investigators, lawyers, and news reporters. The weight of it all was overwhelming, but beneath the chaos, I felt a sense of vindication. The truth was finally being acknowledged, and justice was beginning to take shape. My parents, once so quick to dismiss my concerns, now found themselves under the glare of an official inquiry. Their initial defensiveness gave way to anxiety as the investigation uncovered forged signatures and unauthorized transactions. It was painful to watch the people I loved unravel under the consequences of their choices, but it also reaffirmed why I had to stand firm. The family dynamic shifted dramatically. Some relatives who had been passive observers began questioning their loyalties, unsure whether to side with Lila and our parents or with me. The household that was once a sanctuary became a battleground of whispered accusations and fractured relationships. At times, I felt isolated, caught between the desire for reconciliation and the necessity of accountability. Despite the turmoil, I noticed subtle changes. My father's demeanor softened during our rare conversations. He expressed regret, admitting that he had been blinded by wanting to protect Lila's happiness at the expense of fairness. My mother, too, reached out with tentative apologies, acknowledging the pain they had caused me. While the wounds were deep, these moments hinted at the possibility of healing. Friends and neighbors who had followed the story began to approach me with support and encouragement. Some shared their own stories of family struggles, reminding me that I was not alone in facing betrayal from those closest to us. Their empathy was a balm in the midst of the storm, reinforcing my resolve to see this through. As the investigation progressed, the legal process moved into a formal phase. Court hearings were scheduled, and I found myself preparing to testify, armed with the documentation and evidence I had painstakingly collected. The anticipation was nerve-wracking, but I was determined to be heard, to ensure that the truth could not be silenced. Throughout this period, I grappled with conflicting emotions: grief for the fractured family I once had, anger at the betrayal, but also a growing sense of empowerment. Standing up to those who had wronged me was not just about reclaiming financial security. It was about reclaiming my identity and self-worth. In quieter moments, I reflected on how far I had come since the discovery of the theft. The journey had been painful and isolating, but it had also revealed my strength and resilience. I realized that setting boundaries and demanding justice were acts of self-love, essential for my healing. The court proceedings brought the family's secrets into the open, forcing us all to confront uncomfortable truths. As the trial unfolded, evidence of the fraudulent transactions became undeniable. The judge's stern gaze during hearings made it clear that the law took this betrayal seriously. The weight of the courtroom was heavy, but I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was finally being acknowledged in an official capacity, and the consequences for those responsible were imminent. It was a bittersweet victory, knowing that justice came at the cost of family bonds. As the trial progressed, I noticed fissures appearing within my family's ranks. Some relatives distanced themselves from my parents and Lila, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Others reached out to me privately, expressing sympathy and offering support. These gestures, though small, meant the world. Through it all, I maintained contact with Samir, whose guidance was invaluable. His steady presence helped me navigate the complexities of the legal system and provided a buffer against the emotional roller coaster. One afternoon, after a particularly intense hearing, I received a call from the district attorney. The news was clear. My parents would face charges related to fraud and forgery. The reality of their impending legal consequences settled heavily on me. It was difficult to reconcile the desire for justice with the pain of seeing my parents in such a vulnerable position. Yet, I knew that accountability was necessary. Without it, the cycle of betrayal would continue, and I would never find peace. As the trial neared its conclusion, the public scrutiny intensified. Media coverage painted a complex picture of family betrayal and legal battles. I found myself fielding questions, sometimes hesitant, always careful to protect my privacy while standing firm in my truth. When the verdict was finally delivered, my father received an 18-month prison sentence, and my mother was sentenced to 12 months with probation. They were ordered to pay restitution, though it was clear their financial situation made full repayment unlikely. Sitting in the courtroom, I felt a mixture of emotions: satisfaction that justice had been served, sorrow for the family I had lost, and a cautious hope for the future. In the days that followed, I began to contemplate what came next. The apartment my parents had lived in, tied up in the inheritance, was now mine to decide upon. The memories embedded within its walls made the choice difficult. Ultimately, I decided to sell the property, seeing it as a symbolic step in releasing the past and embracing a new chapter. The process was bittersweet, filled with moments of reflection and resolve. As I packed up my belongings, I felt a sense of liberation. The ties that had bound me to a painful past were loosening, and I was ready to reclaim my life on my own terms. Though the scars remained, I knew that standing up for myself had been the right path. The journey had been arduous, but it had taught me the power of resilience and self-respect. In the quiet moments after the storm, I found peace not in forgetting, but in acknowledging the truth and choosing to move forward. My story, once one of betrayal and loss, was now one of strength and renewal, a testament to the courage it takes to protect oneself, even when it means standing against those you love. The courtroom's heavy atmosphere lingered long after the trial concluded. Though the verdict had been delivered and the sentences pronounced, the emotional wounds ran far deeper than any legal judgment could reach. In the quiet days that followed, I found myself navigating a complicated landscape of fractured relationships and tentative steps toward healing. My parents' absence was palpable. The house felt emptier, the silence louder. I was left to grapple with the aftermath, the void left by their betrayal and the weight of responsibility that now rested on my shoulders. It was a strange feeling, this mix of freedom and loneliness, as if I had won a battle but lost a part of myself in the process. Friends and colleagues offered their support, but even their kindness couldn't fill the gaping hole left by family fractures. At times, I wondered if the cost of standing up for myself had been too high. Yet, beneath the doubt, a quiet strength was growing, a resolve to rebuild my life on my own terms. I spent many evenings reflecting on the journey I had endured. The pain, the betrayal, the public scrutiny. All of it had tested me in ways I never anticipated. But it had also taught me valuable lessons about boundaries, trust, and self-worth. I realized that protecting myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. With the legal battles behind me, I turned my attention to practical matters. The apartment that had been part of the inheritance, tangled in the family drama, was now mine to decide upon. Walking through its rooms, memories flooded me. Childhood laughter, family dinners, moments of joy now shadowed by betrayal. Selling the apartment felt like a symbolic release. I wanted to let go of the past, to create space for new beginnings. The process was bittersweet, filled with both nostalgia and hope. As I signed the final papers, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a sign that I was ready to move forward. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my personal and professional life. I immersed myself in work, rediscovering the passion for graphic design that had once defined me. I reconnected with friends who had stood by me, their unwavering support a reminder that family isn't always defined by blood. Therapy became an essential part of my healing. Talking through the complex emotions, the grief and anger, helped me process the trauma and envision a future unburdened by the past. Each session was a step toward reclaiming my identity beyond the shadow of betrayal. Despite the progress, there were moments of doubt and loneliness. The absence of my parents and the estrangement from Lila left a void that was hard to fill. But I learned to embrace the silence, to find comfort in my own company and the life I was crafting. As time passed, I began to explore new horizons. I considered moving away from the town that held too many painful memories, seeking a fresh start where I could define myself without the weight of family expectations. The idea was both frightening and exhilarating. During this period, I also found myself reflecting on forgiveness, not as a gift to those who hurt me, but as a way to free myself. I realized that holding on to resentment only chained me to the past. Forgiving didn't mean forgetting or excusing, but releasing the power that pain had over me. One afternoon, as I packed boxes for a potential move, I came across an old sketchbook filled with drawings from my childhood. Flipping through the pages, I saw the dreams and hopes of a younger self, untainted by betrayal, full of possibility. It was a reminder that despite everything, that part of me still existed, waiting to be embraced. I decided to share some of my story with a local support group for people who had experienced family betrayal. Hearing others' experiences and sharing my own created a sense of connection and healing I hadn't anticipated. It was empowering to know I wasn't alone, and that my journey could inspire others to find their strength. As I prepared to leave the town, I felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. The familiar streets, once filled with memories both sweet and painful, would soon be behind me. But I was ready to step into the unknown, carrying the lessons and resilience I had gained. The move symbolized more than a change of address. It was a declaration of independence, a commitment to prioritize my well-being and future. I was no longer defined by family betrayals or expectations, but by the choices I made for myself. In the quiet moments before I left, I took one last walk through the neighborhood. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the familiar houses. I felt a sense of peace, knowing that while the past would always be a part of me, it no longer controlled my story. Starting anew was daunting, but it was also liberating. I was ready to build a life grounded in honesty, respect, and self-love. The journey had been arduous, but it had shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. As I boarded the train to my new home, I looked out the window at the fading landscape, feeling a profound sense of hope. This was not just an end, but a beginning, a chance to write a new chapter defined by resilience and the courage to move forward. Leaving the town behind was both a relief and a challenge. I packed the last of my things into the car, the boxes stacked high, each one filled with remnants of a life I was ready to leave behind. The apartment sale had closed just days before, and the finality of that decision hit me harder than I expected. It was as if I was closing the door on years of pain, betrayal, and shattered trust. The drive away from the neighborhood was quiet, the familiar streets fading into the distance. For years that town had been my anchor, a place filled with memories that now felt bittersweet. But as the miles stretched out before me, I realized that holding on to those memories wasn't helping me anymore. It was time to embrace the unknown. Arriving in the new city felt like stepping into a fresh canvas. The apartment was smaller, but it was mine. A space where I could rebuild without the shadows of family drama lurking in every corner. Unpacking felt symbolic, each item placed carefully as if laying the foundation for a new beginning. The first weeks were a mixture of excitement and loneliness. Without the familiar faces and places, I found myself navigating a world that was both foreign and freeing. I immersed myself in work, taking on new projects that challenged and inspired me. The creative spark I thought I'd lost began to flicker again, fueled by the fresh environment and the distance from old wounds. I reconnected with old friends from afar, and made new ones through local art groups and community events. Each conversation, each shared moment, chipped away at the lingering isolation. It was a slow process, but I felt a growing sense of belonging in this new chapter. Financial independence became a priority. With the inheritance reclaimed and the apartment sold, I was able to invest in courses and tools to expand my graphic design skills. I started freelancing, taking control of my career path in a way I never had before. The empowerment of building something on my own terms was exhilarating. Therapy continued to be a cornerstone of my healing. Sessions helped me process not only the past but also the hopes and fears tied to this new life. I learned to recognize the patterns I wanted to break and to cultivate boundaries that protected my well-being. As time passed, I allowed myself to dream again, not the dreams shaped by family expectations or obligations, but my own. I enrolled in an art exhibition, showcasing pieces inspired by my journey through betrayal and resilience. The process was cathartic, turning pain into creation. The opening night of the exhibition was a milestone. Standing among the vibrant canvases, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers came to appreciate the work, many sharing stories of their own struggles and triumphs. Their words reminded me that healing is a collective journey, and that vulnerability can be a source of strength. Through this experience, I found a new purpose: to use my art and story to inspire others facing similar battles. I began volunteering with support groups, speaking openly about the complexities of family betrayal and the importance of self-advocacy. Each conversation reinforced my belief that no one should suffer in silence. Despite the progress, I remained mindful of the scars that lingered. The memories of my family's actions and the pain they caused were never far away, but I had learned to hold them without letting them define me. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about forgetting but about freeing myself from the grip of the past. Letters from my parents arrived sporadically, apologies wrapped in regret and longing for reconciliation. I read them carefully, acknowledging the words but setting clear boundaries. Healing required space, and I was determined to protect the fragile peace I had built. I occasionally thought about Lila, wondering if she too was on a path toward understanding and change. Our relationship remained distant, but I held on to the hope that one day, honesty might pave the way for a new connection, even if it was different from what we once had. The physical distance from my family had given me the emotional space to grow. I was no longer defined by their choices or their betrayal. Instead, I was becoming the person I always wanted to be: strong, independent, and true to myself. As I walked through the city streets, the vibrant energy around me mirrored the renewal I felt inside. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like a victory worth celebrating. In the end, I realized that sometimes, the hardest journeys lead to the most profound transformations. Walking away from the past wasn't about abandoning my family. It was about embracing my own worth and choosing a life filled with hope, authenticity, and resilience. I never imagined that my story would become a beacon for others, a narrative that inspired people to find their voices amid family betrayal and hardship. But as I shared my journey, through art exhibitions, support groups, and candid conversations, I saw the quiet power of truth and resilience ripple outward, touching lives I never expected. It started with a message from a woman named Priya, who reached out after one of my talks. She wrote about her own experience with family deception, and how hearing my story had given her the courage to seek help. Her words were raw and heartfelt, a mirror to my own pain and strength. I realized then that my struggle wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger tapestry of human experience. Encouraged by these connections, I began to speak more openly about the complexities of family betrayal. how love and hurt can coexist, and how reclaiming oneself often means setting painful boundaries. I wanted others to know they weren't alone, that their feelings were valid, and that healing was possible. At a local community center, I hosted workshops where survivors of family conflict could express themselves through art and storytelling. Watching people transform their pain into creativity was profoundly moving. Each story, each brushstroke was an act of reclaiming power and rewriting narratives that had long been silent. Meanwhile, in my personal life, I found peace in the choices I had made. Prioritizing my well-being and dreams over familial expectations had not been easy, but it was necessary. I no longer felt tethered to the past or defined by others' actions. Instead, I was free to explore who I truly was. One evening, as I prepared for another exhibition, I paused to reflect on how far I'd come. The girl who once sat silently, betrayed and isolated, had grown into a woman who spoke boldly and lived authentically. The scars remained, but they no longer dictated my worth or happiness. I thought about forgiveness, not as a gift to those who hurt me, but as a gift to myself. Forgiving didn't mean forgetting or excusing. It meant releasing the hold that pain had on my soul. It was a daily practice of choosing peace over bitterness. My relationship with Lila remained distant, but I held on to hope. I believed that one day, honesty and healing might bridge the gap between us. Until then, I focused on nurturing the relationships that uplifted me and honoring the family I had chosen. Friends, mentors, and fellow survivors who understood the complexities of love and loss. As I walked through the city streets, the hum of life around me felt like an affirmation of new beginnings. Each step was a testament to resilience, a movement toward a future shaped by courage and authenticity. Attending one of my exhibitions, I watched a young woman stand before a painting inspired by my story. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you for sharing. You gave me hope." In that moment, I understood the profound impact of vulnerability and the ripple effect of speaking one's truth. I realized that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in the battles won or the justice served, but in the courage to stand up, speak out, and live freely despite the scars. My journey had transformed from one of betrayal into a testament of empowerment. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because my past was perfect, but because I had embraced it fully and chosen to move forward with grace and strength. The future was uncertain, but it was mine. And as I stepped into it, I carried with me the lessons of resilience, the power of truth, and the unshakable belief that we all deserve to be seen, heard, and loved, especially by ourselves. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.